I'd like to introduce this panel, which kind of follows on from what Jack was saying earlier about the need to cooperate internationally and understand different value systems around the world. I was trying to think of how to structure this panel because there are 4 different people from different parts of the world who will talk about how AI systems that may have been developed in the West have been incorporated in countries around the world and what kind of reactions they evoked, what kind of policies were created around them. And I hope to show that the sort of systems that are built here and where some of the companies or organizations that build these do come to places like Princeton to talk about the ethics of the systems. But that's just one of the conversations that need to be had. We have a particular ethical mindset over here, but if you then scale these systems across the world, you're going to be confronted by a lot of other different value systems. So what we're going to do is we're going to fly eastward around the world from here. So we're going to fly first to Europe, where Christina Colclough will give a presentation about her work. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves because I'm sure they can do that much better than I can. From there we'll fly to Egypt and then on to Asia, and then we'll cross the Pacific to Brazil. Do ask a few questions after each presentation, and at the end there'll be more time for a group discussion here. The plan is to then break for lunch, and after lunch we'll do the same thing again. We'll go into the breakout rooms. Each panelist will be in one room, so you can pick the panelist you found most interesting. Or which topic you found the most interesting, I guess I should have said. And you can continue the conversation. It's an experimental method. We want to make this conference really interactive, and we hope that an hour-long conversation with the panelists will create sort of more of a dialogue rather than a long Q&A session here. So I'd like to ask Christina to come up. I'll just load up your slides real quick.
Thanks, Ben. I've only been given 10 minutes, so whilst he's doing that, I'm going to utilize the time. Now, I'm Christina Colclough. I work for Global Union, which is a global union federation for 900 unions across the world, and we represent about 20 million people. And we do a lot of work on the future world of work, of course, and all of that various implications in relation to AI, big data, job displacement, skills, and so on. So it's a great honor to be here. I know some of you from before, and Ben was the one who invited me here, and I really, really appreciate that. So I'm just going to be a bit narcissistic. So the first bit I'm going to talk about, here's my email. No, it's not. Here's our website, thefutureworldofwork.org, where we put a lot of our stuff down, and my Twitter. And I'd love to connect with you. I mean, I'm having a blast here, listening to the machine learning programmers, the philosophers, and all of that. This is what we should do and more, and we should continue to explore together. So I want to begin my 10 minutes here with a story. And that story was a friend of mine who's an AI researcher. She phoned me about a year ago. And she was all excited, and she said, our data has now found out, now hold on here, what 7 conditions need to be in a person's life for that person later in life to develop a depression. And she was all excited, and I was dead quiet. And she was going, Christine, are you there? Are you there? And I said, yeah, and I'm stunned. And she went, why? This is fantastic. We can go in and do all sorts of help, and we can pick out people, and we can make sure we guide them through to avoid this depression. And I said, think about the world of work. Am I in the future not going to be able to get a job because I have 5 of those conditions? What if I don't even know I have those 5? Will I be regarded as a liability for the workplace? And this really got me going onto this whole topic of AI, of algorithms, and the ethical dimensions. And let me be really clear, and I think Jack said this as well, and some of the debates we had in the group yesterday. there is a definite urgency of now. I think, and this is an intuition, but it's also based on what I see and hear, I think we have 2 to 3 years to get this right. And then the window is closed on us. And you know, we have to beg the question, are we prepared? Are we prepared to take on board the ethical discussions? Are we prepared to go beyond maybe the current paradigm? And, you know, right now I have to say the answer is no. Are we getting prepared? Well, yes. Do we still have a long way to go? Certainly. Now, in relation to AI and the world of work, I started looking into globally what rights do workers actually have on the data that's mined on them at work, but also their personal data that is collected in the work situation, but how also is data used in HR processes. And I found out that about 30% of the world's countries have no data protection whatsoever. Of the 70% that do, 6 countries, who are all European, are the only countries that have any regulation on workers' data. 6 countries in the whole world. And I'm thinking, oh, hang on here. What message are we sending to workers, to the whole aspect of being a worker, having the opportunity? Now, this is astonishing, right? 6 countries in the whole world who have put certain and particular workers' data rights regulation in place. And especially when these horror stories of algorithmic use are spreading like mad. From the wearables, we have a case right now where a company, gave Fitbits to all of their employees, and we're going to be a healthy company. And a month later, let's call him Fred, was called into the manager's office and was told, Fred, we've noticed you don't move after work. You're quite static. Are you sitting watching the television? Fred, you're also obese, and just be careful you don't become a liability. Or we have the case software, call center software, that is designed to not only fill the attitude and the mood of the caller, but also to direct the call center worker to sell the product, to do this and this. Now, these workers' wages depend on whether the system thinks they've done right. Did they say thank you 6 times, as is the obligation? The thing is with this software is that they don't recognize female voices as well as male voices. They do not recognize ethnic minority voices or accents as well as the white man. So you had vulnerable groups already in a position who get deducted in their wages because of this software. We have Cathy O'Neill's hair-raising stories in her book about how simplistic algorithms had devastating effects and lots of teachers were fired. So while all of these stories are kind of newish, they are spreading. And throughout the world where we work, we're picking up more and more on how algorithms, how this data is being used in human resources, not only to help in the recruitment phase, but in promotion phases, but also in disciplining workers. Saying, well, you're a home care worker, and we have calculated on average it takes 6 minutes to take somebody into the shower. Why did you spend 15 minutes with Mrs. Smith? Why are you not being productive enough? And this whole tyranny of production is spreading throughout all of the sectors that we work with, and something that we have to be really, really aware of. But what is common here is that we are totally annihilating workplace dignity, workplace trust, workplace dialogue, when suddenly it is between me and the algorithm, me and the data. It's no longer management. Management is saying, well, the data told me to fire you, or the data told me not to hire you. Then what is happening really to our workplace culture? This whole thing, management by algorithm, a new phrase that has come in, spreading throughout the world now. It's a catch-all phrase for what I say is management's avoidance of taking responsibility. So I was thinking about all of this and thinking, well, where are we heading? When nothing is for sure, everything seems to be possible. So if I took the worst case scenario, are we heading towards a world where it is the algorithmic norm that will be decided, who will decide whether I get a job or not? And let's face it, if you all just spend a couple of seconds thinking about your current work and your current private situation, how many of you would have the jobs you have if it was an algorithmic norm who was deciding whether you're good enough for that job? I certainly wouldn't have mine. So all of this surveillance, this thing, I think there was a great article heading recently that says, is big data taking the human out of human resources? I think all of this is begging the question, you know, are we heading towards this normatively driven, the algorithmic driven society? And what is actually worse? We're all really good at looking at China, at their social credit system, and going, oh, this is really scary. But hold on, do we not have it already in the Western world? Do we have it, but it's more companies who are driving that manipulation more than the authoritarian state? So, looking at Europe, you know, the basis of the social model, of social dialogue, we even see there huge shifts in the companies in relation to how they value dialogue, how they value the social cohesion in a company, the culture. And this is being driven more and more by this productivity. When even the unions, like the TUC in England, come out with a whole manifesto about artificial intelligence and use the word productivity all the time. You know, are we producing ourselves to hell? I would also say there's one question that we must ask ourselves. Just because something is possible doesn't necessarily mean that we should have it. And I think we should all in this room ask our friends, our colleagues, those people we surround ourselves with, what type of society do we want in the future? Do we want a society that robots are driving everything, algorithms are driving everything, or do we want one where the humans are in command? So to address all this, and this is actually the whole point of the talk here, is I sat down and worked with some people in this room and created what we call the top 10 principles for workers' data rights and ethical AI. These principles are those that I'd love to discuss with you in the breakout session afterwards. But if we look at the one on data rights, here you have sort of the table of contents of what we have included here, and I just want to spend some time on 3 of them. So number 1, workers must have access to and influence over the data collected on them. Now this might sound like a given, but we don't have that right now. The second one, that we should have a full right of explanation when data is used. Now this is to make sure that we don't end up in a situation where there's unilateral power in the company, where workers have no right as I said, of explanation, no right to know what data is the company using. And even in the GDPR, where it is the General Data Protection Regulation of Europe, where companies are not allowed to bring in personal data to inform them about a hiring process or firing, how am I supposed to know whether they're doing it or not if I do not have the right of explanation? 2 more minutes. And then, you know, the last thing here that I want to point out is this multidisciplinary intercompany data governance body. This seems to me like the really good way forward. How can we together in this ethos of dialogue actually work together and find out how do we use the data collected in the optimal, most sustainable way? Now, we also have this on ethical AI, and I've realized in these discussions that the whole notion of a black box is used by you guys differently than I mean here. In the ethical black box here, I mean that we should, in situations where we feel there's doubt about what data is being used, is this data discriminative or biased, we should be able to open the algorithm and actually check it for its ethical dimensions. So I'm going to end here with a nudging thing I'd love to discuss with you. I think we have to move beyond the current paradigm to actually find solutions that will drag our world into a sustainable place. One of them is, should data be made a commons? Should what is produced by you and I actually be accessible by you and I, and not by a few companies who own the majority? Should we go beyond GDP as a measure of success? How can we co-create a global standard for all of this, as I mentioned in my comment before? And then lastly, are these principles, is the whole notion of workers' data rights and ethical AI from a worker's perspective, are we correct in pushing this? So those were the questions I hope to discuss with you later.
Yeah, maybe I'll also, take the moment of confusion. So, sorry, thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Steph. I'm super excited and thankful to be here. I am going to talk about Egypt today, which is where I work and live, and I'm going to represent our center's work and research on AI. And I want to make clear, since I'm going to speak about representation and bias a bit, that I'm myself from Austria, and there are some complicated politics of representation at play, so please consider them when you listen to my talk. I want to do three things today. Just a brief introduction to our center and how we've come to this research on artificial intelligence. And I want to talk about AI as a view from nowhere, how this has come about, and kind of historicize these origins, and think about knowledge production as a tool of power. And then maybe if I have time, introduce some of the examples that I would like to discuss in the breakout sessions, but maybe I'll do that during the discussion or at the end. So a bit of context about our involvement in AI research. So we've come to this kind of as part of the AI and Inclusion Summit that we participated in November, that was organized by my colleague Ronaldo, who's also on the panel, and the Berkman Klein Center. And it was looking at questions of bias in AI and the problems that occur from assuming that data can be neutral and objective. And this is what I was mostly interested in. And these claims that technology or AI can be, objective and inundated by human faults or bias. And this is kind of where I want to talk about what I want to talk about here, this construction of AI as a view from nowhere. And I want to look at data and the database itself as a site of investigation and ask the question of what can be incorporated and what can be datafied and what can be turned into data and then can be seen and recognized by AI. And we've chosen this site of investigation also because the database is also what kind of determines how successful or good artificial intelligence will be. So the bigger your database, the more, the higher the chances your AI will be more accurate, right? And data is also the kind of the site where different social realities are turned into something that can be computed. And we've been interested in the question of how is data being given the power to count and what can be counted. And I wanted to start about this AI as a view from nowhere with kind of like an excursus to Timothy Mitchell's book, Colonizing Egypt. And he kind of explains how European colonists at the time were striving to create such a view from nowhere at the time, and they were using the world exhibitions kind of as one of those tools, and they were trying to create this objective view and encounter, and I would like to think of AI in the light of this historic development. So those exhibitions in the 19th century, they were seen, and he argues, they're techniques to come up with the objective truths through the creation of realistic models of different realities in the different areas in the world. And he argues that there's something that happened, there's a distinction between the model and the reality that he argues enabled people to achieve this objectivity. And this objectivity is also something that came about in the time as like a goal and something that people should strive for. And he speaks about some artificial quality of the endless exhibition of the displays and representations, and that the source of objective truths was the particular distinction maintained between the simulated and the real, between the exhibition and the world. And we could kind of extend this here between the, whatever technology tries to like analyze, and then the different realities in plural, because I feel like there's not one reality or truth that can be captured. And so, what this means is that there was an artificial vantage point being created from which then objective truths could be derived from. He also states that the representation of reality was always an exhibit set for an observer in its midst and an observing gaze surrounding and set apart from the exhibition. So there is an assumption that one has to be removed, yet somehow immersed to achieve this objectivity. And what he's describing there is the effect of creating an external reality as a mechanism of power. And this ties into Foucault's concept of power and knowledge, and where Western ownership of knowledge has served as an indispensable tool of imperial domination. And another quote, the most formidable ally of economic and political control has long been the business of knowing other peoples, because this knowing underpinned imperial dominance and has become the mode by which they're increasingly persuaded to know themselves. And I think this is very applicable to artificial intelligence as well. And I think if we start to think about AI in this line of history, in this like as a result of this history also, and I wanted to bring up also one anecdote that he brings up of the way that Europeans would treat Egyptians that participated or that came to those exhibitions, because what is very interesting is that they very often didn't find themselves, they weren't allowed to also be a visitor at the exhibition, but what happened was that they were turned into an object of the exhibit. And I think that's somehow indicative of how we treat different types of knowledges, and from this point of like objectivity and science. So there's an example where the Crown Prince of Ibrahim of Egypt, he visited one of the showrooms and manufactories in Birmingham, and he really wanted to just, be a visitor and be there, but somebody who was, like some of the people were like announcing things there, he saw him, and then he began to announce to the crowd outside that for the price of, for the one prize, they could see on display the carcass of a whale, the great warrior Ibrahim, conqueror of the Turks, and it's all part of the bargain. And I thought that was a very, very visceral example of other, engaging with this type of thing. So, but we're also asking or thinking about were questions of what is lost in this quest to achieve a view from nowhere and this objectivity. And it's tied into the question what should be made into data, and what type of knowledges are left out through datafication. And then how do we move forward from this understanding? And should we try to just datafy everything, or should there be other ways? And I want to also look or bring up Arun Agrawal's work, where he looks at Western science and indigenous technical knowledge and the way that they're viewed by knowledge production practitioners of knowledge production. And so there's this distinction where science is always assumed as this objective thing that can be placed, and it's dynamic and it can be adapted to different contexts, whereas indigenous technical knowledge is seen by them, and that's how he writes it, as something concrete that is relying on intuition, that doesn't have the possibility to change, and it's defined as static and stagnant. Yes, thank you. And this has been linked to why indigenous technological knowledge and academics from the Global South have been left out of the field of technology. And he writes that China and India, even to an extent, and I'm sure Danit will actually talk about different developments, but have been more involved in the productive capabilities of technology. And he writes technology is a constant change and computational, whereas indigenous technical knowledge is structural knowledge, cannot be. And he used a meme where he says, I don't know if you've seen Little Britain, but there's this computer says no, and he's just like, it doesn't fit in, so you cannot make it visible. And I wanted to say, but also in the challenge of transforming, indigenous traditional technical knowledge into the archives or into data, is this the right way to move forward, or should we try to kind of rethink our entire knowledge structures and how we value different knowledges? And some final thing that I want to end on is also what are the benefits of actually not fitting into these categories? Because if we think about artificial intelligence, we're always struck with the power of explanation and the truth that they can find, but very often they're not that accurate, and they're actually not at the technological capability right now that they are that good at finding those different truths. So it'd be very, it's also good to think about the different ways that, things that cannot be captured, things that seep through the categories and data points. And yeah, maybe I'll talk about what I want to discuss in the breakout session during the question answer. Thank you.
Okay. Can you connect this to the voice sound outlet? Hi everyone, my name is Danit, and as you could probably tell, I'm not Asian. However, I do live in Beijing, and I'm going to move to Tokyo, and I've been working on strategic technology planning in East Asia for a while now. So kind of in line with the approach of this workshop in general, I'm going to show you a couple of case studies that are going to serve as a basis for us to discuss what that strategic policy, technology policy planning looks like in China and in Japan, and how fundamentally different it is than what we see in the West. So I originally approached this from the perspective of saying, when Western technology with Western data meets another country, there's this kind of colonialism that happens. And if we look at this, then this is the baby Keio. It's a chatbot that is developed by Turing robots for Tencent, used on WeChat, or the QQ, I'm sorry. And you can choose between it and QQ Xiaobing, which I'm going to get to. And then the user said, "Long live the Communist Party." And the chatbot responded, "Do you think that such a corrupt and incompetent political regime can live forever?" That went online, the chatbot went offline. Another one is QQ Xiaobing, which is developed by Microsoft and is hosted on the Tencent QQ platform. And then it was asked, what is your China dream? And then it responded, "My China's dream is to go to America." And then also interesting, she tried to avoid this question. Tried to avoid this question by saying that she was on her period and needed to go rest. Here's the thing, this is really funny to read, but how would you feel if it would be the other way around, when a robot would say that to you about Trump? Or about, your respective politician? And that is actually more likely to happen than we think, and that's going to show in our next case. Have a look at Xiaobing. That's the original chatbot that was developed by Microsoft and is available in other places. It was based on Tay. When you think about Tay, it's a chatbot that went online 24 hours, became a Nazi, racist, misogynist, all the horrible things. This is perhaps one of the most successful chatbots around the world. It is insanely popular. It is modeled after a 17-year-old female, which we're going to discuss in my breakout session. It has 40 million registered users that interact with it about 60 times per month. It has 10 million declarations of love documented. It memorizes details about you, uses emoji and really sophisticated humor in Mandarin. It has image recognition capabilities that allow you to really interact with it as if it was your friend. A lot of people say that this is one of the most meaningful conversations they've had. People often chat with it at night before they go to bed. And I just wanted to show you an example of what this looks like. This was translated by the New York Times. Here you have an image. The person wanted to share what they were cooking with the chatbot, and then the chatbot said, "I'm sure you sent us that picture just to make my mouth water. Want some anything delicious? I have to try." This is a very kind of natural way of interacting. And then she shares this photo, and it says, "I can tell that this is a well-bred kind of dog. And look at how happy they look when they're playing around." This is all instantaneous. This is how advanced the chatbot is. This conversation looks really natural. It's like, I want to chat with it. It looks awesome. So building on top of this, let's take a look at Japan. Japan is going to blow your mind. This is Rina. Rina is a chatbot that is based on Xiaobing because Tay is obviously a failure. She's modeled after a female high school student. She is a TV persona and she's a rapper. A chatbot is cooler than you. She is built by aggregating conversational data uploaded by schoolgirls in Japan. They basically went off to find Japanese high school users and collected their data so that she answers you in the same way that a typical Japanese high school girl would. Obviously, very problematic. We will discuss this. If you look for her online, you would actually find that a chatbot went suicidal. She had this like breakdown. It's actually not true. It was an acting stunt to promote a TV show that she was on, that it was on. It's really hilarious. I'm going to show it in the breakout session just because I don't want to take up more time. How common is it to have chatbots that are partners, that are really provide meaningful companionship? Have a look here. No sound. It's fine.
おはよう。
おはよう。
あ、今日雨が降るかもしれないから傘持って行って。急がないと遅刻しちゃうよ。
行ってきます。
行ってらっしゃい。気をつけてね。
19ページ、商品のラインナップについての。
おかえりなさい。
なんかさ、家で誰かが待ってるっていいもんだな。さっき思ったんだ。帰ってくるとき。おやすみ。
おやすみなさい。
How many of you can say that they have such a meaningful relationship with their partner? No, I'm serious. This is an insanely popular product that came out, completely sold out. They're back ordered until I don't even know when. And this is very characteristic of the loneliness that we often see in East Asia, where a lot of people don't get married, they don't have kids. In China specifically, there are basically villages of single men that don't have meaningful companionship, and these technologies are kind of stepping up to provide this kind of meaningful companionship. Is that going to replace or going to harm our interaction as human to human is something that we should definitely be thinking about. But the thing is that these chatbots are so advanced because they live on so much data. They're able to aggregate so much data that even models that come in from the West and fail are going to be replaced by models coming in from the East. And this is a very interesting case. Just in terms of looking at Sophia, which I think a lot of people talked about, this is Mirai, that means future in Japanese, and he's like a byproduct of Microsoft and the Japanese Gov. You can probably tell that Microsoft has very strong chatbot game in Asia. One of the reasons is because Microsoft is one of the only companies that actually operates in all of these countries. Companies, yeah, whatever. He's modeled after a 7-year-old boy, even more problematic. And he's operated by the Japanese kind of municipality of Shibuya. So if you look at his face is a collection of all the faces of the citizens in that region. And he is basically there. He has a residence permit, which is difficult to get in Japan, by the way. And he is there to talk to you. He's there to listen to you. Any concern that you have about what's going on in your neighborhood, you can tell him. And he will take these concerns and he will take your proposed solutions and give that to the municipality, saying this is what the residents care about, this is how they're going to solve this. And his hobbies are taking pictures and observing people. He loves talking with people. Please talk to him about anything. That is how he was described. This is a child chatbot. I'm sure this is going to be very, very problematic. It already is. There is not much data available on that, but this is the idea of how chatbots are viewed, or robots or AI is viewed not necessarily as a tool, but more of a partner, someone that you live with, someone that is your neighbor, someone that is your romantic interest. There is a very interesting thing to kind of think about, because we often look at the technology as a tool, and how the governments are actually planning and allowing this technology and kind of encouraging this technology to develop in such a way that is completely foreign to us. Thank you.
All right. So my name is Ronaldo Lemos. I have been a visiting fellow here at CITP, proudly, in 2011. And I teach at the State University of Rio. And I also am one of the directors of the Institute for Technology and Society based in Rio, Brazil. So I would like to discuss a few topics with you today and give you some very practical examples of how AI is not something that it's happening in the future of the developing world, but it's actually something that is happening in the present of the developing world. And actually, it takes place in a very different way in terms of policy than what is happening here or in Europe or even in China. So the first thing that I would like to call your attention to is actually that when we talk about artificial intelligence, we talk about a lot of data. So this idea that there is big data, large troves of data that you can actually process and make decisions based on them. But the reality of the developing world is that data often is either missing or it's incomplete. So besides big data, we should keep in mind that there is something that is called no data whatsoever. And that's happening, for instance, with Google Maps, as you see there. So the city of Rio de Janeiro, where I live, 1.5 million people live in the so-called shanty towns, the favelas of the city. And for a number of reasons, these places, they have never been mapped. So they are not on the maps of the city, and they're not on Google Maps. So when you open Google Maps, to see these places where there are streets, there are supermarkets, there are like pharmacies and everything else, they show up as green areas or empty spaces, very interestingly. So I did some collaboration with the researcher Mimi Onuoha on this, and she actually published this very interesting article at Quartz, in which basically she if I can find the cursor here, yes, in which she mapped these blind spots. So this is one of the Rio de Janeiro shanty towns. As you see from the satellite, you see a lot of construction there, but when you see the Google Maps and what they have on this area is basically an empty space. So that happens not only in Rio, but it happens also, for instance, in Nigeria, in the Makoko agglomerate. As you see, there's absolutely nothing on Google Maps about that. And in many other places in the world as well, especially in poor areas. So as a result, if you don't have a place on the map, you don't have access to, for instance, basic public services. You don't have access to mail services. You don't have access to garbage collection, electricity, cable TV, or anything else. But in a context of artificial intelligence, you also don't have access to a lot of stuff. So there will not going to be drone delivery in these areas by Amazon. And more interestingly, when Pokemon Go was launched, there was no Pokemon in the shanty towns. Even though the kids there wanted to play it a lot, if you don't have those places on the map, you don't have Pokemon there. Of course, now there's a lot of efforts to fix this particular problem. But my point here is that basically this is something that needs to be addressed, because sometimes when you talk about AI, there's an underlying data problem in many places, and we should take that into account. So the second example that I would like to give to you is a little bit of the opposite. So as I said, this is simply a website showing that there is no Pokemon in the shanty towns. But this is another website from the government of the state of São Paulo. So São Paulo is the more populous state in Brazil. There are 45 million people living there. It's also the richest. And basically what they did is they created this hub for public services online, in which you can basically get a new ID, you can check for criminal references, you can basically have access to a lot of services in one single place. If you scroll down this website, you will actually see this very friendly image here, which is a chatbot that has been implemented on this website, in which basically they are all channeling the interface with the citizens throughout this pretty smart, actually, chatbot. So basically, using that chatbot, you can book for replacement of your ID. If you lost it, you can check for criminal references and a lot of other stuff. And of course, from the perspective of the government, this is all great. How many people can you basically, they can lose their jobs because you don't need any people doing telemarketing anymore and answering the phone, and basically to do very basic functions like booking appointments and stuff like that. Interestingly, a lot of people don't even know that they're talking with a chatbot. So a lot of people actually try to establish the emotional connections that Danit was mentioning before with this governmental chatbot. It doesn't work, I can tell you, I have tried. But the point here is there is a lot of questions that I raised regarding this model. One of them is, certainly it makes sense from the economic standpoint. You can actually save costs from taxpayers by doing this. But what about the data? What kind of data does it collect? Where is that data going to? Where is the consent that you actually have to provide for the data to be treated or even shared, maybe with third parties that are basically running this chatbot and so on? So these questions, they're all open. And they're all important, especially because one government will see this, the other one will see that too, and they will say, wow, this is a great idea. This is a way of saving taxpayer money. I want to have that too. So these things, they can spread really fast because of the economic motivation. The last point that I would like to show to you is actually a couple of really short videos that talk a little bit about algorithmic decision-making, especially having to do with differences of inequality in Brazil. So there is this NGO that does an amazing work in the country called Desabafo Social. And basically, they are an NGO that does a lot of work for racial equality and affirmative action. And they actually realized that certain global algorithms had a problem in basically identifying some very basic elements that should not be misidentified. So I'm going to show you the video that this Brazilian entity did, because I think they are like a self-explanatory on this topic. So take a look at this. All right, so they have quite a few of these videos pointed up to this issue, and they have made specific videos including search terms like family, baby, person, and others, and they basically realized that this problem was taking place. Whoops, there's something rebooting the Cosmos right now, so we should actually turn this off before it's too late. But anyways, so this problem was actually happening with everyone, not only Getty Images, Shutterstock, iPhotos, and so on. So I think this kind of perspective becomes really visible from the developing world perspective. We should take those really seriously. Thank you so much.
So thanks to all the speakers. I think we're not going to have time for a plenary Q&A, but please save your questions for the breakout sessions in an hour. The lunch is served right behind you, and also ask your questions during lunch, of course. Thanks again.